Welcome to Sagely Speaking with Mary Bono, the esteemed former Congresswoman known for her insightful perspectives and vast experience. Prepare to be engaged in thought-provoking conversations with influential personalities, exploring a wide range of topics, from social issues, politics, and policy, to personal development, shedding light on important issues that impact our society. Now, here's Mary.
Hello and greetings. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Sagely Speaking. Have you ever wondered how hard it must be to pick yourself up out of overwhelming grief and channel that grief into action? Today we are talking about life after losing a child. Joining us is Matt Capelouto, president of the Drug-Induced Homicide Foundation. Matt, we appreciate your participation, your expertise, and your willingness to share your story with us. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, Matt, can you start by telling us a bit about your daughter, Alexandra, and her story and what your family has been through?
Yeah, I guess for the most part, I'm typical middle-class American family. I have a beautiful wife and 4 daughters. My daughter, Alexandra, was a middle child. And all my girls have gone on to do great things. They're all nurses, college graduates. Alex was going to Arizona State University, and she was in her sophomore year when she was at home on Christmas break. And 2 days before Christmas in 2019, after spending the day Christmas shopping with my wife and buying gifts for her siblings and so forth, at some point she reached out to a drug dealer on Snapchat that evening and purchased what ended up being a counterfeit oxycodone pill. And my wife found her dead in her bed the next morning. She had taken half of this pill, and we had eventually found out it contained a fatal dose of fentanyl. And this was a game changer for us. Complete game changer.
So how did you pick yourself up after that and take that grief and do something positive and strong with it? I think that I would be crumpled on the floor for a long time, and yet you've been such a great advocate. How did you do that?
This was back in 2019. There wasn't the awareness of fentanyl back then that there is now. And what kind of took me by surprise was the initial investigation by the deputy that showed up on the scene at our house. And he said that, this is non-criminal. Your daughter died of a drug overdose, and sorry, but she shouldn't have been taking drugs. He had mentioned fentanyl, but again, we didn't really know much about fentanyl. And my wife immediately was questioning him on the fact that he had mentioned that she apparently consumed half a pill. And she immediately was questioning the fact, well, how can this be an overdose? It's not like she took a whole bottle of pills. And so we just saw this as very different right from the get-go. And boy, I'm thinking to myself, and we're going to let whoever provided this to her continue to do this. We're not going to go after him. And so over the next couple weeks, we were really, it was a very confusing period, but I said to myself, this isn't right. This is not an overdose. My daughter may have done something that was illegal, which was purchasing a drug illegally, but it was not an overdose. She didn't take too much of something. How do you take half a pill and that be considered taking too much of something? So over the next couple weeks, we eventually got into my daughter's phone. We found the communication with her and the drug dealer, and I called the deputy back, the investigator, and I said, we have the identity of the drug dealer here. And during this time, we had also found out 3 other young people here in our town of Temecula had died during roughly a 15-day period. And I thought, maybe there's a connection here. And the investigator agreed to come back out to our house, speak with us, and he did. He came back out, but he also explained that, hey, if I go after this drug dealer, the likelihood of anything happening to him is about nilch. We just have terrible laws here in California, but he would see what he could do. That was kind of how things got started. And the investigator told me about, how our laws here in California aren't good. So I immediately went to work on figuring out, well, what's wrong with our laws here in California? And I found out. He also had mentioned that even if he finds the drug dealer, he's basically going to get a slap on the wrist. Our law enforcement hands are tied, and our district attorney is likely not going to prosecute him. And that was it. So I ended up writing a letter to our district attorney, Mike Hestrin. I asked to meet with him. I was kind of surprised at the time. He got back to me right away. He said he'd absolutely meet with me. So my family and I, my wife, my daughters, we all met with him in person. He opened his office to us, welcomed us in, and said, what's going on here? How can I help you guys? And we explained to him what happened, how our daughter purchased this pill from a drug dealer. During this time also, we found out that our daughter was seeking Percocet. And we explained this to him at the time in a way of kind of a different narrative than people had really heard at this time. And we explained it from the standpoint that our daughter was poisoned. This is not an overdose. She was seeking Percocet. The drug dealer sold her a counterfeit prescription medication pill, and that's what killed her. And I saw this simply as murder. And he looked at me and he said, I agree. And he had not been aware of, the whole fentanyl epidemic was all new to us, and he was completely unaware of it at this time because no cases were being brought to him. These cases were not being investigated criminally. So he said he would like to get this case submitted to him and to reach back out to the investigator and ask him when he plans on submitting a case to the DA's office. So after that meeting, we went home, and that was my plan, to call the investigator and ask him when he plans on submitting a case. And when I got home, I actually had a phone call from a staff member from the DA's office. And she said, Mr. Capelouto, Mr. Hestrin, our DA, just wanted to let you know that he actually reached out to the sheriff's department to see if he can get your case expedited and something filed with his office.
Matt, we're really lucky. You're bringing up a very important point where Riverside County is lucky in that they have Mike Hestrin, who's a very strong district attorney and goes after these criminals and has treated this as if it's murder. I'm hoping that the rest of the country turns this way. It's been slow, I think, because there's a lot of stigma. And we're lucky because we have Sheriff Chad Bianco. So you have two folks who really understand this epidemic now. Maybe they didn't a few years ago, but they sure do now.
Yeah.
But Matt, I want to credit you because not only you, but I know other advocates like you, parents who've lost children, have changed the narrative. They're no longer saying it's a fentanyl overdose. Nobody intentionally overdoses on fentanyl. It is a fentanyl poisoning, what is happening with our children with these illicit pills that are flooding our schools. And look, it's happening to children now as young as 12. And when I work with you, Matt and I work together on a ballot initiative in California, which I'm sure he'll talk about. But when I work with you, I think about this because I've been an advocate in the space for a long time, back when it was actually legitimate OxyContin that fueled this epidemic. But what bothers me the most is how many children will we lose if we don't get serious about this problem, if we don't pass the legislation that is so badly needed both at the state level and the federal level. How many kids are we going to continue to lose if detectives don't understand the real problem that exists? So again, I just want to credit you with your leadership, and again, mention Riverside County is lucky because they have two very strong leaders in this fight, and I'm really glad you've brought that up.
Yeah, I want to explain a few things. And number one, since you brought up kids, just so you know, in 2022, we lost an average of 22 teenagers each and every week in the United States to fentanyl poisoning. But one thing I learned through this whole process and explained so well by our district attorney, Mike Hestrin, is the problem with our laws in California. In order to hold a drug dealer accountable for someone's death, you have to prove that they knew the drugs they were furnishing could result in death. Inherently, we all know that dealing drugs is dangerous. That's why it's illegal, right? But proving that the drug dealer knew that the drugs could cause death is actually very difficult. How do you prove what they know in their head? So that's where the challenge came in. And what we decided to do, ended up coming up with a law that mimics how we handle our driving under the influence laws here in California. If somebody's convicted of a DUI, they get an admonishment letting them know that driving under the influence, in alcohol or these days of any substance, illegal substance, drugs, is dangerous and it can result in somebody's death. And if you continue to do so and somebody dies as a result of your continued actions, you can be held accountable for murder, second-degree murder in this case. So we wanted to do that same exact thing with drug dealers. Our bill would be very simple. If someone is convicted of manufacturing or selling illicit drugs, they would receive a warning letting them know that if they don't stop and someone dies as a result of that continued action, they can be charged with murder. The fact that the admonishment was given would be kept on record and, if necessary, used as evidence of malice in a subsequent conviction where a death has resulted. Ultimately, my hope would be that it serves as a deterrent to get a drug dealer to stop selling drugs. But if they don't, and they continue to sell, and somebody dies as a result, that admonishment can now be used as evidence to convict them of murder here in California. And that's what we've been fighting to pass for nearly 4 years now.
Hi, I'm Mary Bono, and I want to share something important with you. My friend Angela Kaneki, an award-winning journalist, has a podcast that speaks directly to the heart. It's called Grieving Out Loud. Angela started this after the loss of her daughter Emily to fentanyl poisoning. This podcast isn't just about coping with grief, it's a deep dive into the realities of the fentanyl crisis, addiction, and the journey to recovery. Angela brings together bereaved parents and experts in addiction, mental health, and grief to offer understanding and hope. I've been there and I can tell you, it's a conversation we all need to hear. Find Grieving Out Loud wherever you get your podcasts. I'd like to take a moment to tell you about Zomad, whose technology has paved ways for mass activation of trusted messengers by brands, nonprofits, and public sector clients. We believe that this is the future of media buys, behavioral change, brand lift, and purchasing generated by hyper-targeted reach, combined with architected frequency of audiences viewing different content from multiple creators. For more information, go to zomad.com. That's XOMAD.com. You've been working hard with the California legislature. I bet you feel like you've been beating your head against a wall. How's it been going? I mean, are they receptive to the idea? Is it just a clown show up there?
I've gone to Sacramento multiple times now to testify on behalf of Alexandra's Law, and it goes before our Senate and Assembly public safety committees. And until I was in this position and witnessing this firsthand in Sacramento, I had no clue how bad California is. I come back home from Sacramento and I try to explain to my family and friends what I've just witnessed, and witnessing our legislators argue against a bill like this. I just can't. It's unfathomable to me. They do everything they can to make excuse after excuse to protect the criminals and not the victims. The excuses they give for not passing this are just crazy. I guarantee you there's not a drug dealer today that doesn't know about fentanyl and that fentanyl is likely in the drugs that they're selling. Yet our legislators on the Public Safety Committee will sit there and argue, well, the dealers don't always know what's in the drugs they're selling. Okay, well, that's why we're letting them know. That's what our admonishment does. It tells them that there is a possibility that fentanyl's in the drugs that they're selling and to stop. And they just come up with excuse after excuse. But we keep fighting the good fight. When you explain our bill on face value, nobody can really argue against it. We have widespread support. When it was brought forward last year, we ended up with 22 Senate co-authors. That's more than half of our state Senate.
And those are bipartisan, both parties?
Yes, absolutely. The majority Democrats. We only had, last year, it's changed by a seat or two, we only had 8 or 9 Republican senators and 30 plus Democrat senators, and we had had the majority of them in support of this bill. We just could not get safety committee members to pass it to them for a full vote.
Unreal. I mean, so this is why you decided to put your efforts behind a ballot initiative, right? And take this directly to the voters, which is a very heavy lift, but that's what you and I are working on together.
Yeah, as you know, what we do know is, and you know this, Mary, we had polling done on this, and the vast majority of Californians support holding fentanyl dealers accountable when they furnish fentanyl and it results in death. The number is overwhelming. If we can get this to the voters for a vote, this will pass. And it's just too bad that our elected representatives who are supposed to represent the people aren't doing their job in protecting the citizens of California.
That's right. Well, it's a heavy lift, but I think there's a lot of passion by a lot of advocates involved. But I think this is our hurdle is, you mentioned it. Parents don't know about this. You and I've talked about it a lot. Parents don't know about this problem oftentimes until it really hits them hard in their own family. So they don't pay attention. So the polling data is huge. What is it? Over 80%, I believe, of Californians support this notion. But getting them involved is hard because this is always somebody else's problem. It happens some other school, some other neighborhood, some other family, unfortunately. And so it's hard to get them involved. But I know you also have a bill in the U.S. Congress with Congressman Darrell Issa, the same thing, Alexandra's law. So we're hopeful that can pass.
The bill makes so much sense that, again, this just shows, it's a common sense bill. And fortunately, Congressman Darrell Issa saw that as well. So he's bringing this forward as a federal bill. I still hope it passes at the state level because in order for the admonishment to be given at the federal level, somebody has to be being convicted of a federal drug crime. And typically, not always, but typically those are your more sophisticated, larger scale drug dealers. And I really think the people who are driving this epidemic are your unsophisticated drug dealers, your street level drug dealers. And most of those cases are left to be handled by local law enforcement and fall under state laws. But those are the people who need to be getting the admonishment. Those are the ones that need to be deterred from continuing their actions. But hey, we'll take this at the federal level as well. The good thing is as long as that admonishment's been given, then a state prosecutor can still use that as evidence to charge them with murder if indeed they continue and somebody dies as a result, of them selling illegal drugs. But a couple of things I want to touch on also real quick here. I think There's this falsehood that the opposition, those who oppose us, have done a great job of convincing the public of the so-called war on drugs. That's an exploited tagline. If there was a war on drug dealers, we would not have the number of deaths that we have now. And I can back that up with a statistic that nobody can disprove. Only about 2%, in fact, it's really less than 2% of all drug deaths result in the conviction of a drug dealer. And until that changes, these dealers are going to continue getting away with murder. And we talk about China, where this chemical comes from. We talk about the cartels who they're selling it to and are flooding it into the United States. I wholeheartedly believe until we start holding those accountable here in the United States, this problem's going to continue. We've never been able to stop drugs from coming across our border. And now we've got a drug that's far deadlier in dosages that are just measured in micro amounts. We're not going to stop that. The problem, there's too many wheels in motion in China. I don't believe we're going to be able to prevent China from manufacturing and distributing this deadly drug. It starts here in our own country and holding those responsible right here.
Amen. I couldn't agree with you more on that, Matt. I think we need to wake up to the seriousness of this. Again, people who aren't involved until it's too late need to become involved. There's a lot of activity at the federal level, not necessarily about holding drug dealers accountable, but other things, investments in prevention, treatment, recovery. There's been a lot of good news, but this is all relatively new in the space that basically it's one big ecosystem, and we can't sort of handle one part of this without addressing it all. So that's the good news. I had heard that the judge awarded you some financial or punitive damages to the dealer. What can you go on about that a little bit before we close?
Yeah, so eventually the drug dealer in our daughter's case was arrested. At the state level, we could not meet that burden of legally what is known as implied malice, which is what I touched on earlier, proving that the drug dealer knew the drugs he was selling could kill my daughter. So our case was turned over to the feds for federal prosecution, where the laws are a little bit different. You don't need to prove that the drug dealer knew the drugs they were providing could result in death. You just need to prove that the drug dealer knew what he was doing was illegal and that a death resulted. So he was eventually convicted on federal charges, but I also filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the drug dealer. And we actually believe this may be a first in California. We ended up getting a default judgment in that case. The drug dealer, at this point, we have a judgment against him for $5,025,000. And again, we think this may be a first in California where we were awarded where a drug dealer is being held responsible financially for wrongful death. There was another case where somebody was awarded $5 million plus as well, but that fell under the Drug Dealers Liability Act, which is also good. I mean, it basically shows that in that case, the person was responsible for a death too, but ours is a little bit different because it's an actual wrongful death case.
Well, I know congratulations it's not the proper term. I don't know what you say to somebody in this instance, but thank you for fighting that fight. Hopefully that $5 million will be a deterrent to others. They do this because it's profitable, right? And they sell cheaper crap because it's more profitable.
And I do want to mention, we're likely never to never see a penny of that $5 million. It's worth about as much as the paper that it's printed on. But yeah, we did this out of principle. We want to send a strong message. It is my goal that at some point, hopefully sooner than later, this stigma of drug use changes, and the greater stigma is that of drug dealing. And if you're dealing drugs, not only are we going to hold you criminally responsible, we're going to hold you financially responsible as well. And I'm going to do everything in my power until my last breath here on earth to get to that point where drug dealing is looked upon as one of the worst things somebody can do.
Well, Matt, I'm here to tell you that I'm with you step by step. Anything I can do to help you, and I'm with you. I'll be in your foxhole or whatever you want to say about, I believe in you and what you're doing. I know we could go on for hours and hours and hours, as I said earlier, and I hope you'll be back. Do you want to share a website or where people can track what you're doing, get more information about
Yeah,
what you're
thank
doing?
you. I'm very heavily involved in a nonprofit organization that I serve as president of. It's Drug-Induced Homicide. Our website is drug-inducedhomicide.org. What we're about is accountability. We want to help other parents and families who have fallen victim to this situation. If they're having problems getting traction with law enforcement in their area, reach out to us. We have a lot of experience in this area. We know a lot about all the laws in the different states and our federal laws. So we really want to work with other families. We are stronger in numbers. The more we can come together and be a voice for our loved ones, we know that's going to lead to change all across the United States. And we're seeing that happen. Anybody who's in our situation who's lost a loved one, not just to fentanyl either. There's all sorts of crazy synthetic chemical drugs now that have taken over the drug market. Anybody who's lost a loved one to any of these drugs, reach out to us at drug-inducedhomicide.org. I also want to mention one other thing. I think it's important to know that there's a line that is crossed when somebody goes from drug use to being a drug dealer. And when they cross that line, they go from needing help to needing to be held accountable. And again, I'm just really trying to emphasize the need to go after drug dealers in our country. We have to end this here. It starts at home.
Well, you said it right, Matt. Again, there's a difference between using and dealing. And, there's a place for compassion, absolutely, with people who are suffering with the disease of addiction. But there's also a time for reckoning when they cross that line you speak about. So, Matt, I want to thank you for being on my podcast today, and I want to thank the Drug-Induced Homicide Foundation as well for all you all do. I know there are a lot of families behind your efforts. I do hope people go to that website again, druginducedhomicide.org. So, Matt, please promise me you'll be back as things shape up for you. And I just want to tell people thank you for listening. And for more information about our podcast, please visit sagelyspeaking.com. I'm Mary Bono, and I welcome your feedback at contact@sagelyspeaking.com. I look forward to our getting together again soon with more Sagely Speaking.
Thank you for joining us today on Sagely Speaking with Mary Bono. Remember, wisdom is a journey, not a destination. For more insights, visit our website at sagelyspeaking.com.